going to be looking at topics under the standard 3.2 for 7th grade and under the Study Island lesson, angles and lines. So this lesson is mainly about a certain pattern that's created between parallel lines and a transversal, and there's also going to be some vocabulary words that you're going to need to know. And once you get those two things down, you should be pretty successful with these questions. And remember, as always, please be taking notes so you have those notes to refer back to about those vocabulary words and that pattern later on when you're trying these questions on your own. And if I go too fast, just pause and rewind so you can get caught back up. And then you can even pause at the beginning of the question, work the problem out for yourself, and then watch the video so that you can get a gauge of what you're doing good and what you still need to work on. And so I'm so glad that you're joining us today, and let's go ahead and take some notes. Our first vocabulary word is congruent. And in this section, we're going to be looking at congruent angles. So that means they have the exact same measure and they have the same size and shape. So here's an example. This angle is 110 degrees and this angle is 110 degrees. They're just going in different directions, but they're congruent because they have the same measure. Now, two angles are supplementary when they add up to 180 degrees. So you could have two scenarios. You could have a set of adjacent angles that are supplementary and they're going to create a line. Or you could have non-adjacent angles so they don't touch. They don't share a side and vertex, and then they're still going to add to 180 degrees. So both these pairs are examples of supplementary angles. All of our questions today are going to deal with parallel lines cut by a transversal. And so parallel lines are lines that never cross or touch. So here A and B are lines that never touch. And then the transversal is a line that intersects both of them. And so when you have this scenario, it creates angles on the interior of the parallel lines and on the exterior of the parallel lines. And so there's 4 angles on the exterior and 4 on the interior. And when these lines are parallel, all of these angles are either going to be pairs of congruent angles or pairs of supplementary angles. And we're going to look at the vocabulary for for what we call those different pairs. Our first 2 pairs are vertical angles and linear pairs. So vertical angles are 2 angles that are opposite angles, and they are always congruent. And here's the examples in this picture. So opposite, so 1 is opposite from 4. So those are 1 and 4 are vertical angles. 3 and 2 are opposite of each other, so they're vertical angles. 5 and 8 are opposite of each other, so they're vertical angles. 7 and 6 are opposite of each other, so they're vertical angles. The other pair we're looking at is a linear pair. And so they're supplementary angles that form a line. So they're always going to add to 180. And there is 8 of those pairs in this picture. So here, 1 and 2, they're right beside each other and form a line. That's a linear pair. 7 and 5, they're right beside each other. So they form a linear pair. And here you can see all 8 of them. The other 3 pairs are alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding. And so when you have the parallel lines in the transversal, all 3 of these pairs are going to be congruent. So we have vertical angles that are congruent, and then we have alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding pairs that are congruent. And then the linear pairs are supplementary. They add to 180. So alternate interior means both angles are on the inside, but they're on alternate or opposite sides of the transversal. So here, these 2 purple angles are alternate interior pair. They're congruent. These 2 black ones are alternate interior. They're going to be congruent. And then there's opposite exterior or alternate exterior. So they're going to be opposite, but on the outside. So these pink ones are on opposite sides of the transversal, but they're outside of the parallel lines. These blue ones are opposite the transversal, but outside the parallel lines. So those two pairs will also be congruent. And then corresponding means that they're in a corresponding spot. So both of these pink ones are above the parallel line and to the left of the transversal. So they're in corresponding spots. The blue, they're above the parallel lines and to the right of the transversal. The black are below the parallel lines and to the right of the transversal, and so on. And those are going to be congruent. When you put all of those facts together, it ends up creating this pattern where if this angle here equals 120 degrees, then the one across it is a vertical angle, so it's also going to equal 120 degrees. And then the alternate interior is going to make this one equal 120 degrees, and then the other vertical angle is going to make this 120 degrees. And then because we know a linear pair adds to 180, 120 plus 60 is 180 degrees. And then all of these other green angles, following the rules that we just talked about, are also going to be 60 degrees. So when you have the transversal crossing two parallel lines, it creates this pattern where you have one measurement in these four places and then the other measurement in the other four places. So now let's look at some example problems. So you could be asked, which of the following are vertical angles? So we're looking for angles that are opposite each other. So A and B, they're beside each other. They're a linear pair, so it's not A. B and E, they're not opposite each other, so it's not B. A and E, they're not opposite each other, so it's not C. And now let's look at A and D. They are straight across from each other, so your final answer here is going to be D. Angle A and angle D are vertical angles. So this question here asks, which of the following angles is congruent to angle A? Well, remember our pattern that we created, these four angles here are all going to be the same measurement. They're all going to be congruent. So that means not B, not angle G, not angle F, but angle D is the one that's straight across from it. So that's a vertical angle. So C is going to be your final answer. This problem here says that lines AB and CD are parallel. If angle 5 measures 145 degrees, and so I am going to write that in, so I would recommend that you copy this picture down so that you can write it in also. So it's going to be 145 degrees there. What is the measurement of angle 8? Well, angle 8 is opposite angle 5, so these are vertical angles, and I know vertical angles are congruent, so angle 8 is also going to be 145 degrees, which is answer C. This question here tells us these lines are parallel, A, B, and CD, so we can assume all the patterns that are created with alternate interior, alternate exterior, and corresponding angles. And so we know that angle 1 is 141 degrees. And we want to know, what is the measure of angle 2? Well, angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair, so that means they have to add to 180. So to get the measurement of angle 2, I'm going to have to subtract 141 from 180. And when I do that, I get 39 degrees is the measure of angle 2, which is choice C. So here it tells us the lines AB and CD are parallel, and it tells us that angle 6 measures 37 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and write 37 degrees. You can go ahead and pause and copy the picture and write in 37 degrees yourself. And then it wants to know, what is the measure of angle 8? Well, here, these angles are right beside each other and they form a line, so they're going to be a linear pair, which means they're supplementary. So to find the measure of angle 8, I'm going to have to subtract 37 from 180. And when I do that, I get 143 degrees, which is choice D, and the measure of angle 8. Here it tells us that the lines S and T are parallel, and it tells us that if angle F equals 112 degrees, then what is the measure of angle J? Well, here, the angle F here is to the left of the transversal and above the parallel line. Angle J is to the left of the transversal and above the parallel line. So that means they're corresponding angles, and corresponding angles are congruent. So that means that J is also 112 degrees, which is choice D. You could also think about the pattern that we talked about before and the fact that all four of these angles are going to be congruent and have the same measure. So here angle F equals 131 degrees. So I'm going to write that in. You can copy the picture and write it in also, so go ahead and pause if you need to. Then what is the measure of angle F? Well, looking here, the angle F is above the transversal and to the left of the parallel line, and angle H is above the transversal and to the left of the parallel line. So they're corresponding angles, so that means they're going to have the same measurement. So that's going to make A here my final answer. And also remember that these four angles here are always going to have the same measurement. All four of those will always be congruent. Here, they want to know which of the following are alternate exterior angles. And so here we have four pairs of angles to look at. So let's take these one by one. So angle E and angle G. So we have E and G, they're across from each other. They're vertical angles, so they can't be alternate exterior, so it's not A. Next, let's look at F and L. F and L, they're both on the exterior, and they're on opposite sides of this transversal here. So they are alternate exterior, so B is going to be your final answer. This question also asks which of the following are alternate exterior angles. So we're looking for angles that are on opposite sides and on the outside. So here, the angles that are on the outside are A, B, G, and F. And so angle A and angle H are on the opposite sides of the transversal. And then angle B is on the opposite side as angle G. So these are my two pairs of alternate exterior angles. And the one of those that's listed here is choice B. So that's going to be my final answer. So this problem tells us that line AB and CD are parallel. And so it also tells us that the measure of angle 2 is 45 degrees. And it wants to know what is the measure of angle 7. So if I look here, both of these angles are on the outside of the parallel lines, but on opposite sides of the transversal. 7's on the left, 2's on the right. So that means they're going to be alternate exterior angles, which means that they both are going to be 45 degrees, which is going to make my final answer D. You can also remember the pattern that if angle 2 is 45 degrees, then all four of these angles will also be 45 degrees. So which of the following are alternate interior angles? So that means they're going to be on opposite sides of this transversal, but on the inside. So if I look, these are my four interior angles. If I look at angle C, angle F is on the opposite side of that. So angle C and angle F is one pair of alternate interior angles in this picture. And then if I look at angle D, the angle on the opposite side of the transversal is angle E. So that's going to make angle D and angle E alternate interior angles also. And the one pair that's listed in my answer choices here is choice B. So that's going to be my final answer. In this problem, they tell us that lines A and B and CD are parallel. And they also tell us that the measure of angle 5 is 131 degrees. And it wants to know what is the measure of angle 4. Well, I can look and see that angle 5 and angle 4 are both on the interior of the parallel lines, but they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So they're going to be alternate interior angles. And I know that alternate interior angles are always congruent, so it's going to make angle 4 131 degrees also. I can also remember that if angle 5 is 131 degrees, then all 4 of these angles will also be 131 degrees, which also gives me choice D as my final answer. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.